A reading from the book of Genesis. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. She said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac." The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named after you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make him a nation also, because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, "Do not let me look on the death of the child." As she sat opposite him, she lifted her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Amen.
In the summer, every summer, I am a reader of fiction. It's a ritual that I've kept for quite a number of years now. When school is out and I am finally free to read whatever I choose to read fiction. Novels, short stories, you name it, I read it in the warm summer months. And so, for these past few weeks, as I have been settling into a still somewhat unfamiliar routine here at Glen, Ellyn, I have also been settling into a very familiar routine, getting to know the imagined worlds and characters and the voices of some of my very favorite authors, as well as a few that I've never encountered before. Now, I should probably begin what I'm about to say by confessing that I'm only a few novels and one New Yorker fiction issue in, and so it may be that I'm just on some kind of bizarre reading streak, but so far I'm finding that every story I'm reading is just so depressing. I mean, most years this summer reading for me is really fun. This year it's like a guaranteed trip to the psychiatric clinic. There are broken families and broken people and murder and plane crashes and race wars. This is what I'm reading, and it's almost like there's some kind of orthodoxy being imposed from above that has decreed that fiction, to be worth noticing at all, has to be a festival of pessimism and despair. It has to be a terrible blackout where no ray of sunshine can get in. It's like there's a rule saying that only if the story is decked out in funereal black will a reader ever figure out that story is good. Just this week, I was mulling over this odd turn in my reading before I realized that it might not actually be a turn at all. At the last church I served, not too far from here in the city of Plainfield, Illinois, one of the more regular non-youth ministry related things I did was the leading of a small book club. Each Monday afternoon for roughly 4 years, I met with some of the church's older members to discuss about 100 pages of fiction a week. We read all kinds of things together, and from a wide range of publishing dates, but almost inevitably, each week when I would open up our discussion for a few general reflections to help us begin, whether we'd just been with a piece of classic fiction, a modern novel, a banned book, whatever, I would hear the same 7 words over and over again. I like it, but it's just so sad. Now, admittedly, there are plenty of odd and upsetting rules imposed from above these days, to the point that rebelling against the rule that fiction has to be sad might seem like a pretty inconsequential one for me to be so upset about. But I have found that when I'm angry, it helps me to talk about it. And you gave me the pulpit today. So here it goes. Get ready for a rebellion, because I am tired of this rule, and I'm ready to prove to you that although I am angry, I am not mad. This rule is for real, and I can prove it to you. To do so, let me offer you a couple of quotations straight from my fiction writing textbooks in the Master's Writing Program at DePaul University. First, from prolific novelist Janet Burroway, in her text, Writing Fiction, I quote, "In life, conflict often carries negative connotations, yet in fiction, dramatic conflict is fundamental because in literature, only trouble is interesting. Life offers periods of comfortable communication, peaceful pleasure, and productive work, all of which are extremely interesting to those involved, but passages about such times by themselves make for dull reading, and they cannot be used as plot." Then there's this one from award-winning writer and professor Charles Baxter. I quote, "Say what you will about it, hell is story-friendly. If you want a compelling story, put your protagonist amongst the damned. The mechanisms of hell are nicely attuned to the mechanisms of narrative. Not so the pleasures of paradise. Paradise is not a story. Paradise is what happens when the stories are over." Did you catch the trend? I mean, so help me, this is what they said, this is what they're teaching aspiring novelists. The best stories are awful stories, and that's the end. Let's all go jump off the Willis Tower. Look, I know, and you know, that life is no fairy tale, that it's not particularly easy. But I think we can safely assume that most other people have also suspected that by this time. So for a novelist to put forth that particular grand idea is about as original as a newspaper headline telling us today that the wall of Jericho fell. And so if it's not telling us something new, I guess my question is, what is the point of all these sad stories? Why manipulate every plot in such an upsetting way? Because plot manipulation like this, it has the potential to hurt the story, to hurt the reader. Plot manipulation is an author's best and greatest tool, but if they're not careful, it can be used in really damaging ways. I find myself wondering these same kinds of things when I come to the story of Hagar and Ishmael in our text today. What values is this story supporting? What are we being taught? What is there to learn? Why is this tragic story of a woman and her son having the snot beaten out of them over and over again so important to our faith? Yes, there's a happy ending, but it takes character and reader an awful long time to get there. And along the way, what is it that we as readers are supposed to see? Readers have struggled with these questions for a long time, with many answers emerging from the wrestling. And a lot of them manipulate the plot to support readings and values that we might find quite troubling. Like the idea that maybe Hagar's story is one that tells us how to accept the idea that God actually wants us to suffer sometimes. I mean, after Hagar was mistreated in Genesis 16, God told her to go back. As a symbol of the oppressed, Hagar has become over the years many things to many people, She has been named as the faithful maid who's exploited, the surrogate mother, the other woman, the black woman who's abused not only by the men she knows in her own class, but also by the women of the ruling class. She's been called a resident alien with no legal recourse, the runaway, the expelled, the homeless. She's been called the welfare woman, the single mother with child. She's been named and identified in a great number of ways, but very few of them point to a pleasant kind of story that we might actually want to read, let alone the kind of pleasant story that we might want to live. But even if she is all of these things, Hagar is also a pivotal woman in the Genesis story. She's the first person in all of Genesis to be visited by an angel of the Lord, the first person to give a name to God. Where Israel is concerned, she's the first woman to bear a child. And when that child is born, God promises to make a nation out of him. The Israelites understand Hagar and Ishmael to be the ancestors of the Bedouin people, and today Ishmael is associated with the beginnings of Islam. And beyond all of that, Hagar is one of the very few individuals, and an even smaller number of women in the Bible, who are said to speak to God. Interestingly enough, in today's text, God speaks to Hagar too, though it's almost like a sad or taunting punchline when God does. I mean, poor Hagar has been ordered to have a child with her master. She's despised by her mistress when at work. She's mistreated, runs away, comes back, is mistreated again, and then banished. She's found herself in a desert wilderness where she's certain that she's going to watch her beloved son die. And then the text tells us that an angel of God calls from the heavens and says, "What troubles you, Hagar? What troubles you, Hagar?" I don't know, maybe she has a hangnail. Maybe she's got sun in her eyes while she's watching her son die of thirst. Come on. Of course, we as readers and as people who encounter the divine ourselves know better than to think that God or the angel does not know. God and the angel have been following along. They are familiar with the plot. And so together they tell Hagar not to be afraid. And God opens Hagar's eyes to see a water well. Just like that. Just a well and a few words of assurance from the Lord, but it is enough. Hagar fills the skin with water, Ishmael drinks, and God is with them. That's the end. Most of us can't imagine what it would be like to live a life like Hagar's. We can't imagine being owned by another person, having our bodies used for someone else's purposes, the worth and whereabouts of our lives determined by someone else's desires. Likewise, we can't imagine what it would be like to have experienced Hagar's life and then to have to try to make sense out of this idea that we need not be afraid. That suddenly freedom, luxury, comfort, stability, and all those other things we take for granted were ours. But what if we could? What if we could understand what it meant to worry about whether or not we could do something that seems so simple as survive? What if we knew the feeling of our hope and our hearts being as drained as empty water skins in the desert? What would it be like to have no idea that no is a viable answer when someone asks you to do something you'd rather not? What would it be like to have no family, no community, no home, no sight? What would it be like to prepare to lie down in the desert and let your child and yourself die? Can you imagine? Maybe that's what the sad stories are for imagining. Imagining a life so different from ours. Imagining by reading it all and not rushing ahead. Maybe these stories exist so we can enter into the pain of them, like someone experiencing it for the first time, so that we can be hurt by their stories, and then healed by their stories, and then amazed. But we must be willing to see and to experience it all, the joyful along with the miserable, the lovely along with the grotesque. We must be willing to have our hearts bruised and to encounter pathways that aren't so picturesque, to keep the characters company and walk along with them as long as we can. I think it's time, our sad character says today as we walk beside her, to simply lie down and die. Lie down and die, we think to ourselves, watching her give up. Why would you ever do that? It's just too much. Too much what? Too much to bear, too much to see, too much to live. But then an angel of the Lord appears and changes the scene and Hagar's very life. Living is what you were made for, the angel tells Hagar. Get up, God is calling you, telling you not to be afraid, inviting you to see the water well. You don't have to be miserable, Hagar, or live in this hell. Take heart, God is calling you. There's a path out there. There's a way in the wilderness. It may not be scenic, but wait until you see what's at the end. It's just down the way, Hagar. Why would you not want to go? Why would any of us not want to go? God is calling us. God beckons in all of our stories, happy and sad, imagined and true. So let us encounter these stories. Let us listen. Let us learn. And then let us get up, take heart, and be amazed. Amen.